That piece of shit's locked himself in his office.
Shawn, you were in on that?
Fucking idea. I got no place. God's my fucking witness. My hands are clean of this one, I swear to God. He's yelling at me out there. I gave him a belt when I came back here. I will not have any part of it.
Bret screwed Bret.
Hi, Sponsored Cheap Pops, you're on the air.
Subscribe! Today, what we're going to be talking about, folks, a time-tested topic that we've never covered in great detail here. Of course, we're talking about the Montreal Screwjob. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels, you know the story. The story is Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels had a bitter rivalry, and Bret had an opportunity to go to WCW, and Vince at the time felt pressured because he just lost Hall and Nash, and he was losing in the ratings, and he thought he had to keep Bret no matter what. And he signed a very lucrative $1.5 million deal over a 20-year period, biggest contract in WWE history at the time in terms of total length. What we saw then, about a year into it, after Bret Hart goes on the run of his career, turned heel, he was the first person after Hogan to win the title 5 times. And what we saw was that Vince said, I can't afford you anymore, so I have to let you go. I'll even help broker your deal with my competitor. I'll help you. I will literally wrap up the best contract you can have. That's what Vince said. And we know what happened. Bret Hart refused to do the JOB on the PPV to Mr. Shawn Michaels at the Survivor Series 1997 in Montreal. And so, quote, what a rumored line was, if Bret didn't want to do business, we got to make him do business. You know what happens. Shawn puts on the worst sharpshooter in the history of wrestling. Can't even get it right the first time around. And then he finally gets Bret into it. And Earl Hebner rings the bell without Bret Hart tapping. And then Bret Hart famously spit on McMahon, wrote WCW to the hard camera. He did it the right way. He knew it was backwards. That's how smart Bret is. And so he did it this way. So it looks like it's good to you guys. So it was interesting. And then, of course, we know the story. Bret said, Vince, if you are still here in my locker room, by the time I come back, I'm going to knock you the fuck out. I'm paraphrasing. Vince didn't leave. Vince gets knocked out. Huge black eye. And Bret Hart goes off to be part of one of the worst spots in WCW history after in the Hogan Sting setup. But that's a whole other story. Vince McMahon the next night goes out and famously says,
Bret screwed Bret.
Because he didn't do the time-tested tradition of dropping the title on who the company wants to be the champion. And that's the story we heard, right? That's the exact story everyone pro-WWE tells you, Bruce Pritchard particularly. I just rewatched the Dark Side of the Ring episode about the Montreal Screwjob. I've seen several videos. I remember watching it as a kid. I remember what Bret Hart said in his documentary, Wrestling with Shadows. And what he said in this documentary, they all line up. His story never changed. But the one thing that people don't seem to question too often is what was the real reason Vince McMahon decided to fire Bret Hart? Let's look at the facts. Bret Hart, outside of the clique, was widely popular amongst the boys. Bret Hart was on the run of his career, just put 2 consecutive bangers on WrestleMania 2 in a row, Iron Man match and then the Steve Austin I Quit match. I mean, Bret Hart was delivering at the point he never delivered before in many respects, even as a heel. And what he did was groundbreaking, a hero to the rest of the world, but villain in the United States. Bret Hart was part of the change of the Attitude Era, whether people want to admit it or not. He was more Attitude Era than Shawn Michaels in many respects. Yes, he didn't pose for Playgirl, and no, he didn't hump a flag, and no, Bret Hart didn't fake injuries along his career just so he wouldn't have to perform in a certain situation like WrestleMania 13 when he was going to have to lose to Bret, or if he lost his smile. And then, of course, he had that really bad back that surprisingly kept him on the shelf all the way until his contract expired. And then all of a sudden he wanted to wrestle again. Interesting. And that begs the question. Vince McMahon couldn't afford to pay Bret Hart. Vince McMahon couldn't afford to pay a guy who's been the most consistent star you've had for the last decade outside of The Undertaker. Vince McMahon couldn't pay a guy who delivered 2 all-time matches in 2 WrestleManias in a row with 2 different opponents, which Shawn Michaels and Steve Austin. A guy who was getting booed mercilessly in the United States and selling a shitload of merch and making his stake as a great heel and hero at the same time, Bret Hart. He couldn't afford to keep him. In fact, he couldn't afford him. He was bleeding money so bad, he had to cut him before he even got one more WrestleMania out of him. Because that makes a lot of sense given Vince McMahon's business practices. Vince McMahon always wanted to keep those guys till at WrestleMania, finish the story at WrestleMania. That's how Vince booked. But all of a sudden, he's going to change his protocol because he can't afford $1.5 million a year. That story and the fact that it's told so much and believed is beyond ridiculous. Vince McMahon did not fire Bret Hart or try to get him to go to WCW simply because he couldn't afford to pay him. You could have cut 4 or 5 or maybe even 6 wrestlers on that roster that would have equaled Bret Hart's career. Maybe 3 guys or 2 guys. Did you really need the headbangers at the moment? Or Los Boricuas? What? You couldn't cut those guys? No, you're going to cut one of your top 3 stars in your company. That was at an all-time high in terms of heat, in terms of popularity across the world, and in terms of storytelling. It was an all-time creative high for Bret the Hitman Hart. But you just couldn't afford to pay him. But you can afford all members of Disciples of Apocalypse. The fuck out of here. I don't believe it. I never believed it. I thought it was bullshit. Let's go back and see what people have said. We know what was going on with Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels. Bret Hart, rumored to have had an affair with Sonny, who verifiably was fucking Shawn Michaels. Now we know that Shawn was fucking her. So Shawn Michaels took his personal shit because maybe Sonny was flirting with Bret Hart. It wasn't like she didn't get around, folks. Flirting with Bret Hart, maybe to make Shawn jealous, and Shawn brought that on television.
And now Bret has a problem with his wife.
Talking about sunny days. Shawn Michaels' insecurity about Bret Hart consistently being more popular in the back, consistently being considered the better guy, and also consistently being there. Even when he was hurt, he was on television. Whereas Shawn Michaels couldn't even lose to Bret Hart, so he lost his smile right in time for WrestleMania 13. So now we got Undertaker and Sid instead of Bret Hart, Shawn. But have no fear, we had another banger, Bret Hart and Steve Austin, which made Steve Austin. Bret Hart had a lot more to do with making Steve Austin than that disaster of a match Shawn had a year later at WrestleMania 14. And Shawn will tell you that was a stinker, not just me. Mr. WrestleMania, one of his 3 disastrous matches that no one seems to bring up for whatever reason. They don't want to bring up Diesel and Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 11. You don't want to bring up WrestleMania 14 or the fact that he sat out WrestleMania 13 with a bullshit injury because he was back a couple weeks later, a bullshit injury, and he lost his smile. No, he didn't want to drop the belt to Bret Hart at WrestleMania 13. It's that simple. And so by the time WrestleMania 13 came out, Bret was actually more relevant than Shawn Michaels at this point in time because Shawn, he had to get his smile back, and then he had another issue with an injury, and he was a disgruntled little bitch, and admittedly so. Not a very good human being, Shawn Michaels, 1997. Everyone knows it. The thing with Sonny happens, and they get into a big brawl in the back, Hartford, Connecticut. Shawn Michaels gets lumps of hair ripped out by Bret the Hitman Hart. Goes into Vince McMahon and says, one of us has got to go. This is an unsafe work environment. This is bullshit. And Shawn Michaels starts planting the seeds that maybe I'll just not wrestle because it's worked before. And I'll go to WCW once they realize I won't do it. Vince, you need to make a decision. It's either me or Bret, because I'm not fucking doing this anymore. I'm the Heartbreak Kid. And I'm going to fake a back injury for the next 7 years. It was only 4 or 5. 4 years, I guess, right? I'm not saying he faked it, but he could have been back a lot quicker. He just happened to come back after his contract expired. I don't know about that one. Another bullshit. Smells bullshit to me. So Vince looked at Shawn and he said, "Goddamn, kid. Well, maybe we can make a work out a deal." Now, my theory is very salacious, so I'm not going to go into it. But Shawn Michaels had My jersey came out right there. But Shawn Michaels had a power over Vince McMahon no wrestler has had since or before. What Shawn Michaels wanted, Shawn Michaels got. Even after he was the one who broke the kayfabe. Even after being a malcontent little bitch in the back for years. Vince McMahon let him get away with it where he would not let anyone else even come close to getting away with it. Fuck, the Ultimate Warrior did the same kind of shit, and he fired him on the spot at SummerSlam, I believe 1991, maybe 93, too? Something like that. Maybe 93 even. Vince didn't take that shit from anybody ever. But all of a sudden, Shawn Michaels tells Vince what's what? Why? And because that's what happened, folks. Shawn Michaels gave him an ultimatum. It's either me or Bret. And it needs to happen right away. And so Vince McMahon said, okay. And the story we hear is that it was all financial, it was all business. No, it wasn't. If you believe that, there is a bridge in fucking Brooklyn that I have, and I will sell to you for $19.99. My Venmo is in the corner. I don't. It was the Brooklyn Bridge, by the way. And I don't own that, for those of you questioning. You could still Venmo me $19.99, though. The taxes on it are ridiculous. It's really... Anyway, so the point is here, folks, is that Shawn Michaels got Vince and to fire one of his biggest stars, his champion, and a guy that was at an all-time high in terms of heat and reactions. Whether it be across overseas where you couldn't even hear yourself in the arenas or him getting booed out of the building at SummerSlam 97, which I was there. And I was happily raising the 5 being in his 5th world championship run. Very happy about that. And I'm glad I saw his last WWE championship run. Obviously, folks, I'm a huge Bret Hart fan. And I think the way Shawn Michaels acted caused a lot of really bad things to happen in the world of professional wrestling. So that's the reality. Shawn Michaels told Vince, him or me. And Shawn Michaels has, for whatever reason, had a power over Vince McMahon. Vince McMahon never called him out for his bullshit. Never. Let him ride out his contract while he was hurt for 4 years. As soon as his contract's up, hey, my back's feeling better. Let's do it. And then he has Shawn Michaels 2.0, which arguably the better run overall because he was the better person at that point in time. And good for him for being so. And I'm glad Shawn Michaels is a better human being now than he was, because if he wasn't, he wouldn't be in the position he was in. He's in right now. Guy runs NXT right now. And WWE has done everything in their power to rebuild his reputation as a real good guy. Well, then why did Dax Harwood say that he was still kind of a jerk off? You know, sometimes we revert back to who we were when we hang out with the old friends. I know I do. So maybe that's what it was. And I'm glad Shawn Michaels is a better person. Great. But it still doesn't change the fact that he forced Bret Hart out of WWE, period. He had some power over Vince McMahon. And again, my theory is very salacious, and I don't want to go into it. Vince fucked him. And recent reports have not changed my opinion on that whatsoever. Now, this is a theory. It's an opinion. But why else would Vince have such an inability to put Shawn in his place for years? Was Vince really that scared of WCW? And that's the funny part. Bruce Pritchard's on Dark Side of the Ring, and he's saying, well, you know, Bret wasn't just leaving us. He was leaving to go to our competitor like Bret wanted it. Like it was Bret, like, I'm going now, and I'm taking this title with me. Bret said 20-something years ago in his documentary, Wrestling with Shadows, and he said in Dark Side of the Ring, he was willing to drop the title the next night. You could have put it on anybody else but Shawn Michaels. And why did Bret refuse? 2 reasons. One, that detail that gets overlooked by everyone who kills Bret Hart for not doing the business and not doing the JOB on the PPV. Everyone's killing. They don't forget. Bret Hart had in his contract reasonable creative control. That was because of a contract Vince gave him. Now, maybe that's why Vince wanted to get rid of him. I doubt it, though. Because you weren't going to lose control over him for a while. And again, $1.5 million was a lot back then, but it wasn't like Vince couldn't afford it. He could have dropped any couple other superstars and equal that weren't even contributing to your television show. That is such bullshit that was a business decision. It was a personal decision because Shawn Michaels wanted Bret Hart out. And how did Shawn Michaels repay that? Continues his malcontent bullshit and almost did the same thing with Steve Austin. And who can forget the story of The Undertaker basically letting Shawn Michaels know that if he didn't do the job, and this is a direct quote, It would have been a long night for Shawn Michaels if he didn't do the right thing. Shawn did the job in one of his worst WrestleMania matches with Steve Austin. And then he had a back injury that lasted 4 years until his contract expired, and then he was able to wrestle again. Those are facts, folks. That part right there I said about how he was a malcontent and had a problem dropping the title with Steve Austin, that's all been reported as fact by people who even love Shawn Michaels. So I don't know if Shawn even thought that he would not have done the job with Austin. I have no idea. I don't think Shawn's that bad of a guy in that big spot because he knows it would have buried his career forever. You know what I mean? So I don't think Shawn would have done it. But either way, the idea of the kind of person Shawn Michaels was at the time, the idea was there that he would do something like that. And after he loses to Austin, we don't see him wrestle until 2002. Yes, he was a commissioner, and yes, he had some good spots in the middle and all that kind of stuff. But overall, he was not a professional wrestler until 2002. And the reality here is that it caused a chain of events that was really horrible and tragic in the world of Bret the Hitman Hart. He went on to WCW. Vince said at one point, many years prior to him leaving, actually a year prior to him leaving, he said, WCW would never know how to handle you, and you get lost in the shuffle. Now, Bret didn't get lost in the shuffle. He was a multiple-time world champion, I believe. I know he held it at least once, I believe twice. U.S. champion. He was on TV as much as he possibly could be. He did some good things in WCW, but overall, he wasn't what he was in WWE. Not even close. And then we know that Greenberg took his career from him by kicking him in the head, being the green, horrible in-ring performer that Greenberg was. That concussion and that injury ends his career. Effectively, he winds up having a stroke, which many people think had something to do with that concussion. And then Bret was never really the same again and could never come back to compete, which is the unfortunate thing. And that's the chain of events that Shawn started because of his insecurity. Because he wouldn't do business and be a man and do business with a guy who you had great chemistry with and that people cared about what happened between the two of you. Shawn Michaels faked an injury in WrestleMania 13 because he didn't want to lose to Bret Hart. Or let me rephrase. I don't want to say he faked it. The injury that he sustained was not worse than the injury Seth Rollins sustained. Shawn didn't want to do the job to Bret Hart. So the injury became much worse. And what kind of heart do you have when you miss the biggest show of the year because it looked like you might have to do a job? And people wonder why. Well, what about Bret Hart? He should have done the job to Shawn Michaels. He should have just done it and passed on the time-tested tradition. Bret Hart said this 25 years ago, and he says it a couple years ago on Dark Side of the Ring. Bret went to him and said, hey, Shawn, just so you know, I'm going to be a professional no matter all the bad blood. I'm paraphrasing, but all the bad blood between us, I'll take care of you and make sure nothing really bad happens to you. I'll be a professional. And Shawn said, I appreciate that, but I just want you to know that I won't say or do the same. Shawn Michaels was an unleashed disaster of a human being and had this ridiculous amount of weight over Vince McMahon. Again, why? Why? What is the reason Vince let Shawn get away with murder? Every single fucking time. Me personally, I have a very salacious theory, and I don't know if I should even say, and I'm not going to say it. It's disgusting. Vince fucked him right in his heartbreak kid ass. Yeah. I'm just kidding. I don't know that for a fact. I don't know that at all for a fact. And I'm not going to suggest that that's the reason. I'm joking when I say that. However, there is a reason why Vince let Shawn get away with murder. And it is a reason why Vince let one of his top performers and world champion go and expedited the process to him to go to his biggest competitor right before their biggest pay-per-view. And you don't even get Bret Hart's payoff on the next big pay-per-view of WrestleMania. You don't even do that. Vince said, no, we got to get rid of him now. We got to go. Because Shawn Michaels wanted Bret Hart fucking gone. Nothing to do with money. It wasn't a business decision. Vince backed Shawn Michaels as a horse. And we know how that horse turned out the next several years. And we know, unfortunately, what happened with Bret Hart with Goldberg. And it's not because Vince didn't want to pay him the money or he didn't think Bret was worth it or any of that. It was simply because Shawn Michaels said, him or me, and you better do as I say. And Vince did it for whatever reason. Was he afraid Shawn would go to WCW and be a bigger star? He clearly favored, just like every top brass in WWE, clearly favored Shawn Michaels over Bret Hart the entire time. The way they tell their stories, the greatest in-ring performer ever. Yeah, he was great. Fantastic. Is he the greatest ever? No, not at all. Because there's always evolutions to his style as they come up. RVD, Kenny Omega, Will Ospreay. Those hybrid guys who can mat wrestle and also is very quick. There's evolutions every year. So that's the theory I have. Wasn't a business decision. And Bret Hart, quite frankly, shouldn't have had to done all that Vince had to do is have him drop the title to The Undertaker, Sid, Austin, or anyone as a transitional champion to get yourself ready for Royal Rumble. No. For whatever reason, Vince needed to have Shawn go over there. And why? Shawn Michaels is going to be dead in the water by WrestleMania 14 because you saw the writing on the wall with Austin. Austin was clearly the next guy, and he was clearly going to do and become the face of the company at WrestleMania 14. We all saw the writing on the wall. So did Shawn Michaels. And once Shawn Michaels wasn't the guy anymore, he wanted some time away. Found Jesus Christ, became a hard Christian conservative guy after, he banged Tammy Sitch. So how Christian was that? Holy shit. Have you seen her lately? So that's my spiel on the Montreal Screwjob, folks. To me, it's we've been fed this line of bullshit that Vince made a business decision and couldn't afford Bret Hart. That's not why. And no one wants to tell the story in WWE land because Shawn Michaels is considered a golden goat, and you can't talk shit on Shawn Michaels. We have to revere him. Look how good of a guy he is now. Look how he transformed his life. Da-da-da-da-da. He still was a disaster of a human being in the mid to late 90s and caused a lot of pain for a lot of people. So fuck Shawn Michaels in the mid 90s. He's the reason Bret Hart went to WCW, which led to him getting his concussion that ended his career. As Shawn Michaels, as soon as he dropped the title to Austin, sat on his ass until his contract expired, and then all of a sudden he could wrestle again. Tell me when I'm telling lies. The question is, and I want everyone to give you your best guess, why would Vince let Shawn have so much power over him? And I don't know the real reason. I don't. But it was clearly a horrible decision. And that's the bottom line with it. The Attitude Era could have included Bret the Hitman Hart. We could have had another Austin Hart match at WrestleMania for a world title. Imagine Bret Hart and The Rock, both in their prime. Bret Hart could have actually had some really great matches with Triple H, and maybe he would have a little more respect for him, which Bret Hart shouldn't say what he says about Triple H. And by the way, Bret Hart, I understand how bitter he has come off the last 20 years. I get it. Bret Hart's like, yeah, Triple H is a douche and he can't wrestle. It's like, what? Yeah, John Moxley's a piece of shit. Probably has no balls. Just putting it out there. Stabs himself with a fork. What the fuck is that? I don't get it. It's really stupid. Fuck it. Like Bret Hart, he's not shy with his opinions. He's one of my heroes, though, and I love Bret. So obviously, anyone listening to this, you understand why I probably feel the way I do. And that's all I got to say about the Montreal Screwjob. It was Shawn Michaels' ultimatum to Vince McMahon that got Bret Hart pushed out to WCW. And then you hear Pritchard on Dark Side of the Ring crying like, well, Bret was leaving the company to go to our competitor. You guys forced him out. Like he was almost like whining about it. And he certainly took Vince McMahon's position on it in terms of Bret Hart should have done the job, and we thought it wasn't going to be a problem. Well, it wasn't a problem if you guys controlled Shawn Michaels, but nobody in the top brass, particularly Vince McMahon, controlled Shawn Michaels. Nobody. And that's why Bret did what he did. It's a joke. There were so many other solutions that could have been made more sense. I guess Vince McMahon thought the better box office match would have been Shawn Michaels and Steve Austin. We know how that turned out. We know what Bret and Austin did the year before. It is what it is, folks. There is no common sense ground, and anyone with a fair mind that would say it was a business decision and that's why they did it. It was not. It was a personal decision based on Shawn Michaels being a little cancerous bitch. Anyways, I'm glad we got that out of the way.
Hey, folks, thank you so much for watching Moment in the Valley. We hope you enjoyed it.
please hit the subscribe button, comment. Hey, look, and if you're a Shawn Michaels fan, bring it. We can talk. Let's keep it respectful as we talk to each other, though, and let's be less toxic. But I want to thank everybody who watched till the end. This is Silicon Steve Valli. Thank you for watching High Spots and Cheap Pops presents Your Moment in the Valley. We're on our way to 2,000 subscribers. Please join us. And hey, hit us up on Facebook, High Spots and Cheap Pops Pro Wrestling fan page. We're also High Spots and Cheap Pops right on Facebook. You can follow me at High Popper on Twitter. Very rarely on that, or Instagram for that matter. But we are on YouTube and Facebook. So check us out there. And we'll see you here at High Spots and Cheap Pops. Here endeth the lesson.